Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and today I want to do something a little bit different, as every now and then I like to deep dive into some older lore, and I want to talk about some gods which have also been attributed to being chaos gods in their own right, yet it's always been highly debated by the fanbase. This is going back way back in the lore, very much so to the beginning of Warhammer Fantasy in the very early 80s, and there's a lot to discuss here, so I wanted to take the time today just to have a little bit of a discussion and have a deep dive on the Chaos Gods of Lore. The Chaos Gods of Lore are often referred to as just the Gods of Lore, deities in their own right and a mini pantheon if you will. It's often been highly debated as to if they are Chaos Gods in their own right, or if they form as a Anti Chaos Pantheon. Not much is known about the Gods of Lore themselves, as their place in canon has often been very distorted. Do they exist? Who worships them? And what power they may have? But we do know the following. The Gods of Lore came into existence at the same time as the Chaos Gods, and are dedicated to their own ideals of permanence and stability. If they were to succeed in overthrowing the Chaos Gods and establishing their own rule over the known world, all change and development would cease, and nothing would ever change. The Gods of Lore are worshipped by a few individuals in the old world, though their worship is not prescribed. It is not popular either. Most old worlders prefer their own mostly neutral deities. What is a very curious note here is that the Gods of Lore came into existence at the same time as the Chaos Gods, which does make it quite hard to link up to, as we are aware that the Chaos Gods existed long before that of the Warhammer Fantasy world. Their existence was not birthed by the old ones arriving and shaping the world, and of course some other doings which eventually led to the Chaos Gods attacking the Warhammer Fantasy world. Most canon suggests, at least for Warhammer Fantasy, that the Chaos Gods have always existed, at least from the birth of emotion. So as soon as creatures throughout the universe were beginning to be sentient, would feel emotion, would cause war, would fall sick, that's when we started getting the Chaos Gods taking shape and form. So it could very much mean that the Chaos Gods of Lore, or the Gods of Lore depending on how you want to call them, were formed as sentience started appearing and people or creatures, depending on what came first, started establishing their own rules and dominance. Of the Pantheon, there are but 3 deities, and we'll look at them very briefly now and then divide it into their own separate subsections. First we have Luminous. Luminous is the Master of Light, an everlasting and unchanging source of pure light which is said to immobilize anything it strikes, rendering it unmoving and unchanging. He is perhaps the least popular of the Gods of Lore, mainly because the bulk of the concepts involved in his worship are beyond the comprehension of the human mind. Next we have Arianka. In the distant past, Arianka was defeated and imprisoned by an unnamed Chaos God, and it is said that she lies in a crystal coffin hidden somewhere in the old world. Many places have claimed to have found her coffin over the centuries, the most recent, according to rumor, being Prague. It is also said that she can be freed from her coffin only by means of some crystal keys, whose location has never been found. It is not even known how many keys there are, and whether they are hidden together or separately. And lastly we have Sulkin. Sulkin is the Master of Vengeance, an angry god who inflicts the retribution of the Gods of Lore on those who offend them. He is the most popular of the Gods of Lore, and many witch hunters worship him. His followers are held in general fear and mistrust by the bulk of Oldworlders, who find the absolutism and bigotry associated with his worship uncomfortable. Now yes, the writings that I'm referencing are from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition, and while many people don't tend to see that as canon, as it acts differently from the tabletop, keep in mind that 1st edition was not only written by people such as Rick Priestley, but also published by Games Workshop themselves, so this does fall into the mainline canon. Well, many things have changed over the years, but still, this is something that needs to be discussed, and obviously there are a few things that have changed over the years. One important thing here is that you can see there were only 3 Chaos Gods at the time. This was when the world itself and the whole universe universe was being fleshed out. We can see Khorne, we can see Nurgle, and we can see Malal, a Chaos God which we'll eventually cover in its own video, but as you are aware, is the Anti-Chaos God. I'm not fully aware, but I do believe that the Great Game, or the concept of the Great Game, had not even existed around the time of Warhammer Fantasy 1st Edition. So what we're seeing here is 3 different Chaos Gods and 3 Gods of Lore. They didn't even rival each other in terms of power, as we can tell. None of the descriptions actually matched up into being the anti of something else. Khorne was not the anti-Sulkin, Sulkin was not the anti-Nurgle. It was a very strange concept. Now, before we continue, we must have a deep dive into each of the individual deities. And we'll start off with Luminous, as not much is mentioned of him throughout the history of Warhammer Fantasy battles. In fact, I believe all mention to him is actually just from the passage that I read before, yet interestingly enough, he still retains a mention in the Total War Warhammer series when casting with a Light Wizard. Sometimes the Light Wizard will say, Illuminas calls, which is very curious. Obviously, this is a god which has not received any mention since the 80s, and yet gets a mention once again, especially in the canon world of a game series which is incredibly popular, which could mean one of 2 things. Either Creative Assembly are throwing a nod back to very old lore, considering the fact that Creative Assembly has a lot of former Games Workshop staff in their house now, which could be nice, or that Games Workshop themselves are thinking about possibly bringing back certain gods into canon when it comes to Warhammer the Old World, as when we look towards Warhammer the Old World posts by Games Workshop on Warhammer Community, they have mentioned stuff like centaurs and so on, stuff which hasn't existed since the 80s, which could mean that somehow these gods are still canon. We obviously have to take into account everything is canon, not everything is true when it goes to older lore. Next we have Arianka. Now, interestingly enough, we do not even know what type of strength Arianka had. All that we do know is that she was defeated and imprisoned by an unnamed Chaos God, and that she lies in a crystal coffin. Now, this was further expanded upon in a small comic book, which followed the adventures of a champion of Malal as he looked towards a possible target. A physical deity which may be under the city of Prague, which would explain why Prague is so unlucky. It is speculated, however, that she was indeed powerful and had her own style demons of lore, which could have been represented as angels back in the day. Not much is actually known about these so-called demons. We will discuss them later on in the video, however, as they do make an appearance, but we do know that some of these interesting demon angel type creatures did appear during a demonic attack in the city-state of Remas, breaking a demonic siege. Now, it's also been speculated that these so-called demons could be part of Sulkin, though many link it towards Arianka for its more feminine look. Unfortunately, Arianka did not have many mentions in lore since that comic book, as she was created by John Wagner, the man famously known for creating the Chaos God Malal. Obviously, we do know that Malal, however, did get redesigned and reinterpreted as the Chaos God Malice, which, while we have not heard of him too much over the years, he has made some appearances, mostly through that of his servants. This is more recent in the Warhammer 40,000 universe, as during the fall of Cadia, the Sons of Malice do appear, although their appearance itself was very brief, and I do not believe that they have been mentioned ever since. It is very possible that Arianka could have also been redesigned and reinterpreted, but without Games Workshop even saying it or dropping any hints whatsoever, then it's very much out of question. There are a few people who do believe that Arianka holds sway over Kislev, mainly because of her art design, which many people liken that to that of the Tsarinas of Kislev or the Ice Witches too, with some people believing that because ice magic is only so powerful in Kislev, it could be because of the fact that Arianka is beneath that of Prague, with Arianka directly feeding the powers into those of the Ice Witches, those that she deems to be worthy of her power and blessing, in a very similar sense to that of the warrior priest of Ulrich getting powered by Ulrich, or the warrior priest of Sigmar getting power from Sigmar. There are reasons for and against this, mainly because A, you have to take into account that the Kislevites, before they even moved to Kislev, this was back then when they lived in the lands of the Eastern Steppes, they had access to this lore of magic. However, you have to take into account that the lore of ice does not mutate like many other magical lores. Almost as if it seeps from the land from below rather from the winds of magic above, which many people have once again attributed to Arianka, who is in fact buried beneath the soil. Unfortunately, we may never get a proper answer for this, as until John Wagner decides to sell the rights, if Games Workshop is still interested, or if Games Workshop have redesigned her and still have no proper plan, there won't be any mention or any changes to her lore, which is a massive shame, as there was a very good point here as to having a pantheon dedicated to be that of a rival to Chaos. And lastly, we have Sulkin, the Father of Vengeance and the Fist of Retribution. There are some times too that Sulkin was known as the God of Law and Light, which many people start to believe that Sulkin might have been the figurehead of this pantheon. Many pantheons throughout the Warhammer Fantasy universe do not have figureheads, some will do, but that is chosen by their mortal servants. But it could be that Sulkin is the light to fight against the darkness of Chaos. Of all of the gods of lore, Sulkin is perhaps the most well known. We know of his symbol, a clenched fist. We know that there is a lot of worship in the city-state of Remas, as they believe him to be their savior, where a grand main temple is located in the heart of the city, which took over 300 years to construct. In the lands of the Empire, Sulkin is indeed worshipped, and some even see him as a chief deity. This comes from two different places. One from the Order of the Witch Hunters, as they see him as a god of justice. They see him as a god of retribution, and that is everything that the Witch Hunters need to strive to be. For they are the judge, jury, and executioners of sinners, and that is what their god teaches them. It is important to note, of course, that not all witch hunters worship Sulkin, however, a large majority of those, specifically those coming from Talia, will, and they will spread his influence throughout the known world when they are searching for taint, mutation, and heresy. There is also another time that Sol was worshipped, a long time ago when the imperial province of Solon still stood proudly. While this has never been confirmed outright, it has been speculated by the community that the Menogoths, the people who eventually formed the province of Solon, who worshipped an ancient deity known as Sol, could simply be worshipping Sulkin in one of many names. For Solon's sigil is that of the sun, that which spreads light to combat the darkness. Whether or not this is linked, we will never fully know, as unfortunately the province of Solon was destroyed many years ago and is now part of various neighbouring provinces. We also know of a knightly order dedicated to Sulkin, the Knights of Purity. They find themselves established in the city of Marienburg, an extremely secretive knightly order which many people see more as a social club, but this could be at the guise of trying to make sure that nobody realizes what they're really there for. For the Knights of Purity spend most of their time hunting that of mutants. Their quest itself is to rid the world of chaotic taint from wherever they may roam. However, as we are aware, Marienburg is a very interesting place, especially as mutants tend to find that area and call it home. There are also many powerful chaos cults within that area, so the Knights of Purity will mostly have to stay there. Again, not much is known about this knightly order, yet it is interestingly enough to know that Sulkin obviously has that much of an influence, if not only witch hunters follow him, but a full knightly order too. In canon, Sulkin is the only god of lore to receive multiple mentions, not just through very early editions, but also through later editions of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, with the last mention he's received so far being that of 4th edition, so still relatively recent canon. I imagine that this god in particular will receive a lot of mentions in Warhammer the Old World, considering that this would be the perfect time to flesh out various different deities, especially since we know the setting is going to be around the time of Emperors. Now, we have spoken about the three gods of law, and we've spoken about some of their servants, mostly that of Sulkin, yet we also know of a greater demon of law. This has only been referenced a very few times throughout the history of Warhammer Fantasy, and these creatures are known as the Vidag. Sometimes mistakenly called the Life Elemental, the Vidag is a greater demon of law, and is concerned with the laws of life and nature. It is rumoured to have been created by a lawful deity to counteract the depredations of the Murdag. Before we continue, the Murdag was the name of something mistakenly called a Death Elemental, but in fact was a greater demon of Khorne. Whether or not these are bloodthirsters or not is unknown, but they have not been mentioned in lore for a long time. Now we can continue with the physique of the Vidag. The Vidag appears as a young and beautiful woman, over 10 feet tall, and dressed in flowing robes and with long flowing hair blowing in an unseen wind. The robes and hair are frequently decked with flowers. We've actually got a small image of what they're supposed to look like, and that's pretty much it. There has been miniatures way back in the day. I believe this was back when it was just Citadel, but nothing else until 4th edition, where a small, very small mention was in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. A small mention of the Vidag within the forests of Lorelorn Forest, deep in the heart of the Empire where the Drakwold is. It's interesting enough that they did get mentioned again, yet only within the realms of the Wood Elves. It's been a very big topic of debate here, as many people see the Vidag as maybe possible aspects of the Lady of the Lake instead. Or it has also been speculated that Sulkin has seen an alliance of some sort with the Elven Pantheon, as the Lady of the Lake, who holds control over many powerful knights, might be a very powerful ally to combat the oncoming forces of chaos. Their place in canon was called into question during the end times, supposedly the demon Be'lakor saying that they never existed to begin with, yet obviously that could have been an outright lie. Trying to keep Archaon on track, considering that obviously Archaon the Everchosen hated the Chaos Gods. In fact, he did not intend to blow up the world, it was only through his madness which eventually led to that. The reason why he could have stated that these do not exist is completely unknown, as obviously Sulkin remains to get mentions through later editions of the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay series, which were released post-End Times, and these are considered new lore, new canon, as it has to be approved by Games Workshop before it is released. Now, before we end this video, there are of course a few things to talk about. Firstly, originally it was intended to have the two different pantheons as a way to have a big battle throughout the universe of Warhammer Fantasy. This would be Chaos versus Law, however, it was quickly discovered by Games Workshop staff that it just wasn't too interesting, and they kinda got rid of that subject while still keeping the gods for as long as they could, possibly to eventually flesh them out for some big plot point. And this is purely from online findings, but apparently there was supposed to be another book for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 1st edition, which would have introduced another Chaos God of Law. The name Somophia keeps floating about. I'm not sure how valid this is, maybe one of the older guard who might watch this video may know, but apparently that she was going to be the daughter of Arianka and Sulkin, and she would have acted as the opposer to Slaanesh eventually, as many of a theory floating about, again this is just theories, is Luminous opposes Tzeentch, as Luminous strives for stasis while Tzeentch strives for change. Sulkin would oppose Khorne, as both are gods of violence, however one is for justice while the other is for the claiming of skulls. It's the differencing of what could be considered a just war. It's very hard to justify, yet sometimes some people will see it as that way. Then we would have Arianka, who is known as the goddess of self-discipline and improvement, versus that of Nurgle's decay and stagnation. This is again going through some very old forum talk. And lastly, Somophia, who is supposed to be apparently a goddess of eternal purity and beauty, versus that of Slaanesh, which is not. It's one of these things which could indeed be possible. Such things do happen where Games Workshop have normally prepared content. We've seen this when it came to 8th edition and so on, and then just decide not to release it. Apparently the book itself is supposed to be called Realms of Divine Magic, so maybe someone has a manuscript of this or something. It's still rather interesting, as the gods of lore are so unknown. I wanted to talk about them because, yeah, it's a cool topic. I do hope that we'll hear of them more in the future, especially as there have been some rumors here and there. I don't want to talk about them in the video because, well, I'd rather just keep it closely associated with the lore and so on. But you never know, Old World is coming and some things can change. Let's hope. But what do you guys think about the Chaos Gods of Lore, or Gods of Lore, or some people who also know them as Gods of Order? Apparently they were going to have their name changed at a certain point, and were referenced through that through various different books. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a bit of a discussion. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. In the description section below are various links to different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Also in the description section is an affiliate link with Element Games where you could buy loads of hobby-based products, not just Warhammer, for 10 to 25% off. Making a purchase using that link and also our special code, which is also in the description, supports the channel at no extra cost to you, which we think is rather cool. A big thank you to our patrons. Your support means the world to us. It's amazing that people want to help a small channel like us grow and get to a higher level of content. A big thank you to Gibraltar LUSC, Ryan Bertsche, Andrew Prince, and Okro for subscribing to us at our Fane level. You guys are super cool. And a big thank you to Edward Yule, VS Vasan, Aaron Whitman, and Shaggy for subscribing to us at our King level. Honestly, we can't thank you all enough. And lastly, a big thank you to all of you for liking, sharing, and commenting on these videos. Honestly, it's because of you guys that the channel's been growing at such a great pace lately, so we can't thank you all enough. But with that, my friends, thank you so much for watching once again, and we shall see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.